vast sums on his pleasures and what was called his education. To give their son the very best upbringing and education the earth could provide became for them, as it is said there, their ideal. With this aim, they hired for him various what are called tutors and teachers, both from among those existing in the country Nievia and from various distant lands. These latter, that is, these foreign tutors and teachers, they invited chiefly from the country which at the present time is called Egypt. Already by the time this terrestrial, what is called Papa's and Mama's darling, was approaching the age of a responsible being, he was, as it is said there, very well instructed and educated. That is, he had in his presence a great deal of data for all kinds of being egoplastikori, consisting, as it is usual there, according to the abnormally established conditions of their existence, of various fantastic and dubious information, and later, when he became a responsible being, he manifested himself automatically through all kinds of corresponding accidental shocks. When this later great learned being there reached the age of a responsible being, and although he had indeed a great deal of information, or as it is called there, knowledge, nevertheless he had absolutely no being in regard to this information or knowledge which he had acquired. Well, when the said Mama's and Papa's darling became a learned being there of new formation, then, because on the one hand there was no being whatsoever in his presence, and on the other hand, because there had already by this time been thoroughly crystallized in him those consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, which exist there under the names of vanity, self-love, swagger, and so on, the ambition arose in him to become a famous learned being, not only among the beings of Nievia, but also over the whole of the surface of their planet. So, with all his presence, he dreamed and ruminated how he could attain this. For many days he then thought seriously, and finally he decided, first of all, to invent a theory upon a topic which nobody before him had ever touched upon, and secondly, to inscribe this invention of his upon such a Kashir as nobody had ever before inscribed or would ever be able to in the future either. And from that day, he made preparations for the actualizing of that decision of his. With the help of his many slaves, he first prepared a Kashir such as had never before existed. At that period of the flow of time on the planet Earth, the Kashir were generally made from one or another part of the hide of a quadruped being called their buffalo. But Lentro Hamsanin made his Kashir from 100 buffalo hides joined together. These Kashir were replaced there later by what is called parchment. Well, when this unprecedented Kashir was ready, the subsequently great Lentro Hamsanin inscribed upon it his invention concerning a topic which indeed it had occurred to nobody to discuss before, and for which in truth there was no reason why it should have been. Namely, in those wiseacrings of his, he then criticized in every way the existing order of collective existence. This Kashir began thus: man's greatest happiness consists in not being dependent on any other personality whatsoever, and in being free from the influence of any other person, whoever he may be. Some other time I will explain to you how your favorites The strange three-brained beings there on the planet Earth, in general, understand freedom. This subsequently universal Hasnamus inscribed further as follows: undeniably, life under the present state organization is now far better for us than it used to be before. But where then is that real freedom of ours upon which our happiness must depend? Don't we work and labor as much now as during all other former state organizations? Haven't we to labor and sweat to get the barley indispensable to us to live and not to starve to death like chained dogs? Our chiefs, guides, and counselors are always telling us about some other sort of world, supposedly so much better than here among us on the earth, and where life is in every respect beatific for the souls of those men who have lived worthily here on the earth. Don't we live here now, worthily? Don't we always labor and sweat for our daily bread? If all that our chiefs and counselors tell us is true, and their own way of living here on the earth really corresponds to what is required of their souls for the other world, then of course God ought, and even must, in this world also give more possibilities to them than to us ordinary mortals. If all that our chiefs and counselors tell and try to make us believe is really true, let them prove it to us, ordinary mortals, by facts. Let them prove it to us, for instance, that they can at least change a pinch of the common sand in which, thanks to our sweat, our daily bread arises into bread. If our present chiefs and counselors do this, then I myself will be the first to run and kneel and kiss their feet. But meanwhile, as this is not so, we ourselves must struggle, and we ourselves must strive hard for our real happiness and for our real freedom, and also to free ourselves from the need of having to sweat. It is true that for 8 months of the year we now have no trouble in obtaining our daily bread. But then how we must labor those 4 summer months and exhaust ourselves getting the barley we need. Only he who sows and mows that barley knows the hard labor required. True, for 8 months we are free, but only from physical labors, and for this our consciousness, namely our dearest and highest part, must remain day and night in slavery to these illusory ideas which are always being dinned into us by our chiefs and counselors. No, enough. We ourselves, without our present chiefs and counselors who have become such without our consent, must strive for our real freedom and our real happiness. And we can only obtain real freedom and real happiness if we all act as one, that is to say, all for one and one for all. But for this, we must first destroy all that is old. And we must do so to make room for the new life we shall ourselves create that will give us real freedom and real happiness. Down with dependence on others. We ourselves will be masters of our own circumstances, and no longer they who rule our lives and do so without our knowledge and without our consent. Our lives must be governed and guided by those whom we ourselves shall elect from our midst, that is, by men only from among those who themselves struggle for our daily barley.